I stared straight at my father across the kitchen table and said the words I had been holding back for years. If I hear one more sentence from your wife about my money, there won't be any polite conversations left. I will personally explain to her exactly where she stands and why my money is not hers. The room went silent. The refrigerator hummed. My stepmother's coffee cup froze halfway to her lips. My father looked at me like he didn't recognize his own daughter anymore. That was the moment everything changed. I grew up believing that families broke loudly, shouting, slammed doors, screaming matches that neighbors whispered about. I didn't know they could also break quietly, one polite smile at a time, one subtle comment slid under the table like a knife. My mother died when I was 15. Cancer, fast, aggressive, unforgiving. One summer she was complaining about a dull ache in her side. By winter I was standing at her grave in borrowed black shoes that pinched my heels while people told me how strong I was. I hated that word. Strong meant you weren't allowed to fall apart. My father waited just under a year before introducing us to Linda. She wasn't cruel. Not openly. That was the problem. She smiled. Too much, spoke softly, touched my arm when she talked to me like we were already close. She brought casseroles to neighbors and wine to dinner parties. Everyone liked her. Everyone said how lucky my father was to have found happiness again. I was 17 by then, old enough to know better, young enough to stay quiet. When I left for basic training 2 years later, my father hugged me hard and told me he was proud. Linda cried just enough to look supportive without ruining her mascara. "We'll take care of everything here," she said. "You just focus on your future." I believed her, or maybe I needed to. The military taught me discipline, patience, control. It taught me how to listen more than I spoke, how to read a room, how to wait. Those lessons saved me later, even if I didn't know it at the time. The first comment about my money came during my second year of service. We were on a video call. Linda sat beside my father on the couch, her hand resting lightly on his knee, like she needed to remind the world where she belonged. "You must be doing well now," she said, smiling. "With your pay, your housing allowance, all those bonuses." I shrugged. "I manage." "Well," she continued, "it's good to know the family has security." I didn't like the way she said family. The comments kept coming. Always framed as concern, always polite. "Have you thought about long-term planning? Wouldn't it be easier if your father helped manage things? You're so young. Money can be overwhelming." Each time my father would nod quietly, avoiding my eyes. When I came home on leave, I noticed changes. My mother's desk was gone. Replaced by a sleek glass table Linda said made the room feel cleaner. The old filing cabinet where my mom kept everything from insurance papers to birthday cards had vanished. When I asked about it, Linda waved a hand. "Oh, those old things we organized. You don't need to worry about that stuff." I started worrying immediately. One evening after dinner, Linda brought out dessert and casually mentioned we should really talk about consolidating accounts. It just makes sense for families. I set my fork down. "My accounts are fine." She smiled unbothered. "Of course, just a thought." That night I lay awake in my childhood bedroom staring at the faint outline on the wall where my mother's calendar used to hang. I felt like a guest in a place that used to be mine. The breaking point didn't come with shouting, it came with paperwork. A bank notification arrived in my email while I was on duty. A routine security alert. Attempted access. Incorrect verification. I froze. No one had my information except me. When I called the bank, they asked if I'd recently authorized anyone to help manage my finances. I hadn't. They mentioned an inquiry connected to my father's address. That was when something inside me hardened. I went home on leave 2 weeks later. I didn't accuse, I didn't raise my voice, I watched. Linda talked more than usual, about bills, about investments, about how expensive it was to maintain the house, about how my father deserved to relax after everything he'd been through. Finally, she said it. "Well, your money is really part of this household anyway." I looked at my father. He didn't correct her. That's when I stood up, walked to the table and said the words that had been building in my chest for years. Calmly, clearly, without anger. "If I hear one more sentence from your wife about my money," I said, locking eyes with him, "there will be no more polite conversations. I will explain to her exactly where she stands and why my money is not hers. Do you understand? Linda's smile disappeared. My father's face drained of color. He nodded. Barely. But I already knew understanding wasn't the same as respect. And respect was something I was done asking for. I didn't expect anything to change overnight after that warning. People like Linda didn't retreat because they were confronted. They adjusted. They smiled tighter. They waited for a better angle. For a few weeks things were quiet. Too quiet. Linda stopped mentioning money directly. Instead, she leaned into stories, long meandering conversations about stress, about responsibility, about how hard it was to hold everything together while I was gone. She never asked for anything outright. She didn't have to. She let the implication hang in the air like humidity before a storm. My father, meanwhile, grew smaller. I noticed it in the way he deferred to her in conversations, how he'd glance at her before answering even simple questions. I'd catch him mid-sentence changing course because she'd shifted in her seat or cleared her throat. It was subtle, but once you saw it, you couldn't unsee it. The military had taught me something important. Control doesn't always come from force. Often it comes from conditioning. The next time Linda tested the boundary, it wasn't at home. It was at a family gathering, one of those extended dinners where distant relatives showed up pretending we were closer than we were. The kind with too much food, too much wine, and just enough time for old resentments to surface. I was sitting at the table when Linda laughed lightly and said to my aunt, "Well, with her military income, we're very lucky. Not many families have that kind of stability these days." My fork paused halfway to my mouth. I didn't look at Linda. I looked at my father. He chuckled. "She's doing well." That was it. That was the crack. Later that night, I pulled him aside. We stood in the hallway outside my old bedroom, the door closed, the sounds of conversation muffled behind us. "I set a boundary," I said quietly. She crossed it. "She was just talking," he replied, rubbing his forehead. "You're reading too much into it." "I'm reading exactly what's there," I said. "And I'm asking you once to handle it." He sighed. "You don't understand how complicated things are." That sentence told me everything. Complicated usually meant excuses had already been made. A few days later, another alert came in from the bank. This one wasn't an access attempt. It was a request for information beneficiary related. Someone had inquired about procedures for adding an authorized user. I didn't confront them. I documented everything. Dates, times, statements, comments, emails, screenshots. I had learned long ago that emotions faded. Records didn't. Linda grew bolder after that, mistaking my silence for surrender. She started framing her comments as jokes. Careful, she'd say with a laugh, or she'll cut us off. People laughed. I didn't. One evening, she handed my father a stack of papers at the kitchen counter. "These are just estimates," she said sweetly. "I thought we could look at options. Together." I recognized the logo on the top page. My bank. That night I didn't sleep. I lay in bed listening to the house breathe the pipes, knocking the air conditioner clicking on and off. I stared at the ceiling and felt something settle into place inside me. Not anger. Clarity. The next morning I went for a run before dawn. Cold air burned my lungs, steady and grounding. With each step I replayed everything I'd seen, everything I'd ignored, because it was easier than confronting the truth. Linda didn't want help. She wanted control. And my father was letting her take it. When I returned, Linda was already dressed, sipping coffee at the counter. She smiled when she saw me like nothing was wrong. "Morning," she said. "Sleep well?" "Fine," I replied. She tilted her head. "You've been quiet lately." "I've been listening." Her smile flickered, just for a second. That afternoon I made my first call, not to my father and not to Linda. I called the legal assistance office. I didn't tell them names at first. I laid out facts, hypotheticals, scenarios. The officer on the other end listened patiently, then asked a question that made my stomach tighten. "Did you authorize any of this?" "No." "Then you're right to be concerned." Concerned, not dramatic, not paranoid. Validated. By the time I hung up, the shape of what I needed to do was becoming clear. I wasn't going to argue with Linda. I wasn't going to plead with my father. And I wasn't going to wait for another boundary to be crossed. I was going to prepare. That evening, Linda tried one last time, soft, calculated. "You know," she said, placing a hand on my arm, "everything we do is for this family." I met her eyes. "My money isn't..." Her hand dropped. She didn't say another word. But as I walked away, I could feel it. The shift. The realization that I wasn't just pushing back, I was no longer available to be managed. And that scared her more than anything I could have said. Because people like Linda didn't fear confrontation. They feared losing leverage. I didn't uncover the truth all at once. It came in fragments, small, ordinary things that only became dangerous when you put them together. The first was a letter that wasn't meant for me. It arrived while I was back on base, forwarded from my father's address. The envelope had been opened, resealed sloppily, then dropped into the outgoing mail pile like an afterthought. Inside was a notice from a credit card company thanking my father for his recent inquiry regarding balance transfers and authorized users. The name on the account wasn't his. It was mine. I sat on the edge of my bunk, the paper shaking slightly in my hands, and felt that cold, unmistakable sensation crawl up my spine. Not fear, recognition. The kind you get when something you suspected finally steps into the light and looks you straight in the face. I called the number on the letter immediately. The representative was calm, professional, and careful with her words. She confirmed what I already knew: someone using my personal information had requested account access options. Not successfully, not yet, but deliberately. "Is there a reason someone would think they're allowed to do that?" she asked. I thought of Linda's hand on my arm, my father's silence, the word family used like a key. "No," I said, "there isn't." I locked down everything that same afternoon. New passwords, new security questions, verbal passcodes. I flagged my accounts for heightened monitoring. The woman on the line walked me through each step, her voice steady and reassuring. "You did the right thing by calling early," she said before hanging up. Early? That word lingered. Because it meant something worse could have happened if I hadn't. The next piece fell into place during my next visit home. I was looking for an old notebook, one my mother used to keep lists in, nothing important, just something that made the house feel less unfamiliar. I checked the hall closet, then the drawer beneath the phone. Finally, I opened the small cabinet in the study. That was where I found the folder. It wasn't hidden. That was the mistake. It sat on the middle shelf, tucked between household manuals and tax returns, labeled in neat handwriting planning. Inside were printed emails, budget drafts, loan projections, a list of assets. My assets. My name appeared again and again, typed cleanly at the top of pages I had never seen before. Notes in the margins referenced temporary transfers, family use, eventual consolidation. My throat went dry. I stood there, folder open, listening to the sound of Linda moving around the kitchen, plates clinking, water running. The ordinary soundtrack of a home that no longer felt like one. One page stopped me cold. A handwritten note folded and tucked behind a spreadsheet. "She won't say no forever," it read. "Once she understands responsibility, she'll see it's better this way." There was no signature. There didn't need to be. I closed the folder carefully, slid it back into place, and walked out of the study without making a sound. My hands were steady, my heart wasn't. At dinner that night, Linda talked about rising costs, inflation, how unpredictable the future was. She spoke with the practiced cadence of someone laying groundwork, not asking permission. My father nodded along. I watched them both, thinking of all the years I had defended his quietness, his kindness, of how often I'd told myself he was just tired, just grieving, just trying to keep peace. Peace, I realized, was expensive, and I was the one being asked to pay for it. Later that evening, my father knocked on my door. He stood there awkwardly, hands in his pockets, eyes tired. "Your stepmother mentioned you seemed distant," he said. "I didn't invite him in." "I found the folder," I replied. He stiffened. "You went through our things." "I recognized my own name," I said, "on plans I didn't make." He exhaled slowly. She was just thinking ahead. "For whom?" "She worries about the house, about us." "And what about me?" He looked away. That was my answer. After he left, I sat on the edge of the bed and let myself feel it, not rage, not grief, but the dull ache of clarity. The understanding that my father wasn't being manipulated. He was participating. The next morning, I called the fraud department. This time, I didn't speak in hypotheticals. I described the letters, the inquiries, the documents, the handwritten note, the address. The tone on the other end shifted immediately. Do not confront them, the agent said. Continue documenting. We'll open a file. A file. It sounded so small, so official, but it carried weight. By the time I returned to base, I had a system. I scanned every document I found. I photographed handwritten notes. I saved emails and logged conversations, dates, times, exact phrasing. I kept copies in 2 secure locations. I learned the laws that applied to my accounts, my state, my situation. The military had taught me to plan for contingencies. So I did. Linda noticed the change before my father did. "You've been very busy," she said during a phone call, her voice light. "You barely tell us anything anymore." "I'm focused," I replied. "That's good," she said. "We all have to do our part." I almost laughed. Instead, I ended the call and added her words to my log. The final piece came unexpectedly. An email from a loan officer mistakenly sent to me instead of my father. A simple apology followed by an attachment. A draft application. Collateral listed expected future income. Mine. That was when I knew. This wasn't overreach. It wasn't misunderstanding. It was a strategy. And strategies could be dismantled. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay awake listening to the familiar sounds of the barracks, the rhythm of breathing around me, the hum of fluorescent lights. I thought about my mother, how careful she'd been, how she labeled everything, how she used to say that preparation was a form of love. I finally understood what she meant. By morning, the grief had sharpened into resolve. They thought my silence meant permission. They thought my distance meant ignorance. They were wrong. And soon they were going to learn exactly how wrong. I didn't change my behavior right away. That would have been too obvious. People who assume control panic when they sense resistance, and panic makes them sloppy, but only if you let them feel safe first. So I stayed polite. I answered Linda's calls. I responded to my father's messages. I smiled during video chats and talked about work without sharing details. I asked about the house, about their health, about things that made me sound engaged but revealed nothing. Inside, I was building something precise. Every morning before duty, I reviewed my notes, dates, times, statements. The language Linda used when she thought she was being subtle. The moments my father deferred instead of intervening. I treated it the way I'd been trained to treat intelligence, verify, corroborate, document. Emotion was useless here, structure wasn't. I opened a new account at a different bank, one my family had never used. I redirected my deposits. I placed alerts on every existing account. I froze my credit. When the confirmation emails arrived, I archived them in a folder labeled Simply Evidence. I consulted legal assistance again, this time with specifics, names, documents, screenshots. The officer didn't interrupt. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and folded his hands. "This isn't a misunderstanding," he said calmly. "This is attempted financial exploitation." Hearing it said out loud did something to me. It stripped the last layer of doubt. This wasn't family tension, it was misconduct. "What are my options?" I asked. He outlined them clearly: civil remedies, protective measures, criminal escalation if necessary. He emphasized choice, control. "You decide how far this goes," he said. That night I called the bank again, not the general line but the fraud unit handling my case. I asked questions. I learned procedures. I learned timelines. I learned exactly what kind of documentation carried weight and what kind got ignored. Linda sent me a message while I was on the call. "Just checking in. Your dad's been stressed. We're all worried about you." I saved it. The next step was the hardest. I had to let them think it was working. I mentioned casually that managing everything alone was tiring. I said I was overwhelmed. I let Linda hear uncertainty in my voice for the first time. She leaned in immediately. "You don't have to do this by yourself," she said gently. "Families share burdens." "I know," I replied. "I just don't know where to start." Her voice warmed. "Your father can help. We both can." That was the moment I knew she believed she'd won. Over the next few weeks, she pushed carefully. A suggestion here, a form there, a comment about how much easier it would be if things were centralized. She framed it as support, but the paperwork told a different story. Each attempt went into my file. My father avoided my eyes whenever the topic came up. He never stopped her. That silence became its own record. I started rehearsing the conversation I knew was coming, not emotionally but strategically. What I would say, what I wouldn't, where I would pause, where I would let silence do the work. I chose the setting deliberately. A family dinner, neutral ground, witnesses close enough to matter but not enough to turn it into theater. I didn't want spectacle. I wanted clarity. When the evening arrived, Linda was radiant. She always was when she felt in control. She talked about the future, about stability, about how proud she was of our girl. Halfway through dessert, she brought it up. "We've been thinking," she said, glancing at my father. "Maybe it's time to formalize some things." I set my spoon down. "What things?" I asked. She smiled. "Just safeguards, in case anything happens." "To whom?" I asked. She hesitated, just for a moment. "To all of us." I nodded slowly. "I've already safeguarded my accounts." Her smile faltered. "Oh." "Yes," I said, "and I've spoken to my bank, and legal assistance." The table went quiet. My father's face drained of color. Linda's eyes sharpened. "Why would you do that?" she asked, her tone light but strained. "Because someone tried to access my finances without my authorization," I said evenly. She laughed softly. "That sounds dramatic." "It's documented," I replied. Silence. "I warned you," I continued, turning to my father. "I set a boundary." He swallowed. "We were just trying to help." "You were trying to decide for me," I said. "There's a difference." Linda leaned back in her chair, her expression cooling. "You're overreacting." "No," I said. "I'm prepared." I didn't raise my voice, I didn't accuse, I didn't threaten. I simply let them understand that the version of me who stayed quiet was gone. After dinner, Linda tried to corner me in the kitchen. "You're making this into something ugly," she said sharply. "It already was," I replied. I just stopped pretending it wasn't. She stared at me, calculating. "You think you have power here." "I know I do," I said. That was the first time she looked afraid. Because she understood then what my father hadn't, that I wasn't bluffing and I wasn't emotional. I was methodical. And methodical people don't stop once they start. The dinner was Linda's idea. She framed it as a gesture of reconciliation, which should have been my first clue. People who wrong you don't usually seek peace unless they're trying to regain ground. She suggested inviting extended family and aunt. I barely spoke to a cousin who always asked invasive questions, a few family friends who remembered me as a quiet kid, and still spoke to me like one. "It'll be nice," Linda said on the phone. "A chance to reconnect. We're all under so much stress lately." Stress, another word she used when she meant leverage. I agreed immediately. That surprised her. I could hear it in the pause before she responded, the moment she recalibrated. "Good," she said. "I'll make your favorite." I didn't correct her. She never remembered what that was. The evening arrived crisp and cool, the kind of fall night that made the house smell like roasted vegetables and cinnamon. Linda had set the table carefully, candles spaced, just so her good china laid out like a stage. She wore a cream-colored sweater that made her look soft and approachable. My father hovered near the sink, drying the same glass over and over. The guests arrived in clusters, coats and chatter filling the hallway. Hugs were exchanged, compliments offered. Someone mentioned how proud they were of me serving my country. Linda took that opening. "She's doing very well," she said brightly. "We're so grateful. Not many families have that kind of security." There it was again. I caught my father's eye. He looked away. Dinner unfolded slowly. Stories, laughter, the clink of silverware. Linda steered conversations effortlessly, always circling back to responsibility, to planning, to how important it was to think ahead. I waited. It came during dessert. So my aunt said, smiling at me, "Do you plan to stay in the military long term?" Maybe, I replied. "I like what I do." Linda nodded. "And with that kind of income, she'll have so many options." I set my fork down. "What kind of options?" I asked. She blinked. "Well, you know, investing, helping family, making sure everyone's taken care of." The table grew quiet, not tense, curious. I reached into my bag and placed a slim envelope on the table between us. Linda's eyes dropped to it immediately. "What's that?" she asked. "A summary," I said, "of recent activity connected to my finances." My father stiffened. Linda laughed lightly. "Is this really the time?" "I think it's the perfect time," I replied. I didn't open the envelope. I didn't slide papers across the table. I let it sit there, closed, its presence heavier than anything inside it. I've been contacted by my bank, I continued calmly. There have been multiple attempts to access my accounts. Requests for information, draft applications, none of them authorized. The room went very still. My aunt looked between us, uncertain. Someone cleared their throat. That sounds like a mistake, Linda said quickly. Banks get things wrong all the time. Not like this, I said, not repeatedly. My father finally spoke. We can talk about this later. I'm comfortable talking about it now, I said, since it's already been discussed publicly. Linda's jaw tightened. I've opened a file, I continued, with the fraud department, and I've consulted legal assistance. There it was, the shift, the moment when the air changed. Linda's hand trembled as she reached for her water glass. She took a sip, then another, her smile now rigid. This is unnecessary, she said. We're family. That's exactly why it matters, I replied. No one spoke. The candles flickered. I turned to my father. I warned you. I set a boundary. It was crossed. He stared down at his plate. I'm not accusing anyone tonight, I said. I'm informing you. There will be a meeting, soon, with professionals. We'll discuss what happens next. Linda leaned back in her chair, her composure cracking just enough to reveal the calculation beneath. You're threatening us. No, I said. I'm giving you clarity. The rest of the dinner passed in a haze. Conversations restarted forced and awkward. People avoided my eyes. When guests finally began to leave, Linda hugged them tightly, her smile never wavering. To anyone watching, it looked like a successful evening. After the last car pulled away, Linda turned on me. You humiliated me, she hissed. I told the truth, I replied. You did this on purpose? Yes. My father stood between us, his shoulders slumped. Can we just calm down? I am calm, I said. That's the point. Linda laughed sharp and brittle. You think you've won something? I think you understand now, I said. And that's enough for tonight. She stared at the envelope still sitting on the table. What's in it? You'll see, I said, at the meeting. She opened her mouth to argue, then closed it again. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked uncertain. That night I slept better than I had in months. Because the thing about leverage is this, once it's exposed, it stops working. And Linda knew it. The meeting was scheduled for 9 o'clock on a Tuesday. Not at the house, not at a cafe. Neutral ground, an office with glass walls, and neutral art, the kind of place designed to keep emotions from staining the furniture. I chose it deliberately. Emotions blur edges. Paper sharpens them. My father arrived first. He looked older than he had a week earlier. His shoulders were hunched, his tie knotted too tightly as if he'd pulled it that way to remind himself he was still in control of something. He nodded at me when I entered, the gesture stiff and uncertain. Linda arrived exactly 3 minutes late. She wore a dark blazer and heels that clicked sharply against the floor each step, announcing her presence like she still believed this was a stage she could command. She smiled at the receptionist, at the framed certificates on the wall, at everyone except me. We sat. The mediator introduced herself, then the attorney I'd retained, quiet, precise, a woman who spoke only when necessary. I noticed Linda watching her hands instead of her face. That told me something. Let's begin, the mediator said. I didn't speak first. Linda did. This is all very dramatic, she said lightly. We're here because of a misunderstanding. My attorney slid a folder across the table. It's documented, she said. Linda's smile tightened. The mediator cleared her throat. Perhaps we should start with the facts. So we did. Timeline, dates, attempted access, unauthorized inquiries, draft applications, the handwritten note, the collateral listing expected future income mine. Each item was presented calmly, methodically, no accusations, no raised voices. Just facts. My father stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched. Linda shifted in her chair, crossing and uncrossing her legs. This doesn't prove intent, she said. People plan, families plan. For other people's money, my attorney asked. Silence. The mediator turned to me. What outcome are you seeking? I took a breath. I had rehearsed this, not the words, but the steadiness. First, I said a formal acknowledgement that my finances are mine alone. No shared access, no inquiries, no future planning without my written consent. Linda opened her mouth, closed it. Second, I continued a signed statement confirming that any prior attempts to access or leverage my accounts were unauthorized. My father flinched. Third, I said a commitment that my name income and expected future earnings will not be used in any financial discussions, applications, or representations going forward. Linda leaned forward. And if we don't agree? I met her eyes, then the fraud file moves forward. The room went very quiet. My father finally spoke. You'd do that to us. I looked at him. I already did it to protect myself. He rubbed his face with both hands. We were just trying to make things easier. For whom, I asked. He didn't answer. The mediator interjected gently. There are alternatives to escalation, settlement, boundaries. That's what I'm offering, I said. Linda laughed softly. You're enjoying this. No, I replied. I'm ending it. She turned to my father. You're going to let her do this. He hesitated. That hesitation, the space where he should have defended me years ago, was all the confirmation I needed. My attorney placed another document on the table. This outlines the terms, she said. If signed, no further action will be taken. Linda scanned the page quickly. Her face changed as she read. This limits us, she said sharply. It protects me, I replied. And what about family, she demanded. Family doesn't require access to my accounts, I said. She looked at my father again. Say something. He swallowed. Linda, maybe we should just sign. Her head snapped toward him. After everything I've done for you. The mediator raised a hand. Let's keep this productive. Linda leaned back, her composure cracking. You're choosing her over me. My father stared at the table. I'm choosing to stop this from getting worse. She laughed, then bitter sharp. You always do this, you retreat. I watched them detached, as if observing a pattern finally visible from the outside. I'm not asking you to choose sides, I said. I'm drawing a line. The mediator slid the pen across the table. Linda didn't reach for it. My father did. Wait, she said. If we sign this, what happens? The matter ends here, my attorney replied, provided there are no further violations. Linda's fingers curled into her palm. And if we don't? Then the documentation is forwarded, I said. Today. She looked at me, really looked at me for the first time without calculation. You think you're so disciplined, she said quietly, so controlled. I am, I replied. That's why this works. She turned away, jaw tight. My father signed first. The sound of the pen on paper was louder than I expected. Linda stared at the document for a long moment, then snatched the pen and signed with a sharp, angry stroke. The mediator collected the papers. Thank you, she said. We'll finalize this. As we stood, my father lingered. Can we talk? He asked me quietly. I shook my head. Not today. Linda walked past us without a word, her heels echoing down the hallway, each step heavy with something like defeat. Outside, the air was cool and clear. I took a breath and felt something loosen inside me, not relief exactly, but completion. I hadn't won. I had concluded. And sometimes that was better. The silence afterward was unfamiliar. Not the awkward kind that followed arguments, or the brittle quiet that settled over a room when someone refused to apologize. This was different. It was clean, unoccupied, like a space that had finally been cleared of furniture you never chose in the first place. I returned to base 2 days later. The drive was long, stretching through flat highways and early morning fog. I kept the radio off. I wanted to hear my own thoughts, to test how they sounded now that I wasn't constantly defending myself inside my head. They were quieter. My father sent one message that week, just a few words. I hope you're okay. I didn't respond. Not because I was angry, anger would have required energy I no longer wanted to give, but because the message was incomplete. Hope without accountability was just another form of avoidance. I had spent years filling in gaps for him. I was done doing that. Linda didn't reach out at all. I learned later through a relative who still thought updates were helpful that she was telling people I'd become cold, that the military had changed me, that I'd turned money into something ugly. I let her have that story. People like Linda needed narratives. They needed to be wronged, misunderstood, diminished by forces beyond their control. I didn't need to correct her. Anyone who mattered had already seen enough. What surprised me most was how little I missed the house. I'd expected grief, nostalgia, a sense of loss for the place where I'd grown up. But when I thought about it, the house I missed hadn't existed for a long time, not since my mother died. Everything after that had been a version edited by someone else. On my first free weekend back, I drove to the cemetery. It was quiet, the grass trimmed neatly, the headstones catching the afternoon light. I brought nothing with me, no flowers, no prepared words. I didn't need them. I stood in front of my mother's grave and told her the truth. I handled it, I said softly. I didn't let them take what wasn't theirs. I thought about the girl I'd been when she died, how desperate I'd been to keep things together, how willing I'd been to disappear to make space for other people's comfort. I wished I could tell her that it hadn't been weakness, just youth, just love misdirected. I learned how to say no, I said, and how to mean it. The wind moved through the trees, gentle and steady. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was waiting for permission to breathe. Life settled into a new rhythm after that. My finances stayed exactly where they belonged. My name stayed off everything that wasn't mine. The fraud file was closed, marked resolved. The folder labeled evidence went into storage untouched but available. Not a threat, just a reminder. My father tried once more a few months later, a voicemail this time. He sounded tired, older. I should have protected you, he said. I didn't, I'm sorry. I listened to it twice. Then I archived it. Apologies didn't rebuild trust. They acknowledged damage after it was done. I wasn't cruel enough to deny him the chance to reflect, but I wasn't obligated to resume a relationship just because he finally understood the cost of his silence. Some lessons arrived late. That didn't make them my responsibility. The military gave me structure. My mother gave me values. And this experience, unwanted, exhausting, necessary, gave me something else entirely. Boundaries. Not walls, not punishments, just clear lines drawn with intention. I didn't walk away with satisfaction. There was no victory lap, no dramatic sense of triumph. What I gained was quieter than that. I gained ownership of my life. I gained the understanding that respect didn't require permission, and that being difficult was sometimes just another word for being unwilling to be used. Most of all, I learned that family wasn't defined by access. It was defined by care. And care, real care, never needed to be extracted. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to draw a line where one didn't exist before, I'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment and tell me where you're watching from, or what part of this story stayed with you. We share stories like this every day, stories about boundaries, resilience, and finding your footing again. If you don't want to miss the next one, subscribe and stay with us. Let's keep walking this path together.